Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about miscellaneous planets in Second Green Mantle across the colonies in Inner Rim. Some of these planets have independent Senate representation, and some of them just don't have good records as to which sector they're in. Let's start by getting Exodine out of the way, a colony's planet notable only as the alleged homeworld of the six-armed, six-legged Exodinians. I'd love to see a picture of these guys, but there don't seem to be any. Frostwithe is an agri-world focused on ranching whose rolling plains have a perennial bandit problem, and local bantha herders have to guard their herds from both bantha rustlers and plains panthers. It's not super historically significant, but man, that's cool. There's a bunch of other major colony worlds where basically nothing ever happens, which are less cool. Herzab is an agri-world facing farm devastation from giant arthropods called Jevisex. Coensair is a major grand colony with lots of industry in the highlands and seaside tourist towns near the coasts. Adipap and Aquilae are both major Duros colonies, and Vandervalis is headquarters of Vandervalis Systems, a computer conglomerate you might have heard of. Belazura used to be one of those quiet colony worlds, a resort planet that had long declined to exploit its mineral resources to focus on tourism and hospitality instead, thus preserving the beauty of the planet for its inhabitants. The Empire wasn't concerned with beauty so much, and strip-mined the whole planet. Alon is a planet in the Inner Rim home to the Alon Nova Guard, one of many military traditions claiming to be comparable to the Mandalorians. The Alon are allegedly a humanoid alien species, but I can't find a single picture of them out of their armor to confirm that. There's enough on record about them that I'd be surprised if they wound up being humans reported on by a confused spacer, because it'd have to be a lot of confused spacers, and they're from the Inner Rim, which is relatively well documented, but this kind of thing happened to the Chalactans, humans who were mistaken by aliens at one point, so who knows. The Alon Nova Guard supported the Empire, but the Empire did not return the love, considering them a potential threat to Imperial rule, and sending the Nova Guard on suicide missions to winnow down their numbers. Byblos and Lorinar are Corellian colony worlds that eventually became independent worlds with separate Senate representation. Early on, the influence of the Republic on member worlds was pretty weak, so powerful planets like Corellia would run big sectors with tons of major worlds in order to maintain direct control over lots of planets. But by the Old Republic era, the Senate was a pretty powerful institution, and so influential worlds like Corellia started releasing colonies so that they could get friendly planets with a similar culture into the Senate. Byblos and Lorinar are both major shipyards, not quite on the level of Kuat, but closer than you'd think for a planet you've probably never heard of. Byblos in particular is in the running for being the single most prosperous and influential planet in the entire colony's rim, which is only one rim out from the core, so that's a pretty big deal. I say in the running, but I honestly can't think of a single other colony's planet that particularly competes, but maybe I'll find one as I get deeper into this project. And in fairness, Byblos used to have competition from some Neimoidian worlds, but they haven't been doing so good since the Clone Wars. Byblos and Lorinar both became Imperial fortress worlds guarding the trailing flank of the core after the Battle of Endor, during the Rebel push core wars from the trailing rim. There were only a handful of skirmishes here, including a raid by Rogue Squadron on the Jade Moon of Lorinar, and rumor is that the Katarn commandos raided the planet Baudolays behind the Lorinar line of fortress worlds, but the decisive battle of the campaign and the war wound up being on the far side of the core at Jakku, so Byblos and Lorinar peacefully joined the New Republic after it was declared on Coruscant, along with most of the rest of Green Mantle. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Corellian sector in Second Green Mantle Command of the Southern Core. Corellia was right next to the Infinite Empire slave world of Duro, but because Corellia is not especially aligned to the dark side of the Force, the Rakatans couldn't reach them. After their empire fell, the liberated Duros reverse-engineered their hyperdrive, and the nearby Corellians were one of the first species to make contact with them and get hyperdrives of their own. Corellia knew exactly where Coruscant and most of the other colony worlds of Coruscant were located, which greatly accelerated the creation of an intergalactic community, while also leaving tons of empty space in between. In the Proto-Republic era, you could get to Coruscant from Corellia and back again no problem, even if it did take weeks because of how garbage the hyperdrives were back then, but there were untold millions of unexplored planets in between. As a founding member of the Republic, Corellia's story is mostly the Republic story. They fought the Tianese and Waymancy and the Sith and the CIS. The major exception is the Alsacan conflicts. In the early Republic era, Alsacan and their extended sphere of influence broke away from Coruscant a total of 17 times, including the one time they overthrew the Contispex dynasty that had monopolized the Galactic Senate for generations during the Pius Dea era. Corellia was persistently neutral in these civil wars, taking advantage of their position on the trailing side of the deep core to ignore the conflicts of the Arrowhead and the Slice, and blaze trade routes like the Corellian Run and the Corellian Trade Spine. The Slice could be Coruscant and Alsacan's problem. Corellia had all the trailing sectors to worry about. So, the one time Corellian history diverges from Republic history, it's to do literally nothing and win. The Alsacan conflicts had mostly died out by the time of the Old Republic, but there was a resurgence of them smack in the middle of the Old Republic era, soon after the Great Galactic Wars, when an exasperated Corellia attacked both sides and held their leadership at blaster point in the Senate to force them to sign a treaty to finally resolve the conflict. Corellia has a history of fiercely resisting any galactic government that isn't the Republic. In the Great Galactic Wars, the Corellian Council sold out the planet to the Sith Empire, but the Corellian public rallied around the Republic and, with the help of the Republic military, kicked the Sith Empire back out of the core. In the Galactic Civil War, Garm Bel Iblis was one of the big three leaders of the new Republican wing of the Rebel Alliance, alongside Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, later succeeded by his daughter Leia. Corellia protested the reorganization of the Republic into the Empire the day it was declared, and throughout the Imperial era, the whole Corellian sector was a dagger aimed at the back of Green Mantle, to the point where Green Mantle's primary objective for most of the war was to keep an eye on the Corellians. Corellia didn't rebel until after Jakku, but once the New Republic was officially declared on Coruscant, the dominoes fell really fast. Not just Corellia, but Deveron, Duro, Queller, Lorinar, Byblos, tons of major planets all across Green Mantle joined the New Republic, and even Humberine, a pro-Imperial planet, signed a treaty recognizing the New Republic while splitting off into an inner systems Imperial remnant, which lasted for like 5 minutes before it collapsed and they joined the New Republic anyway. Green Mantle mostly just surrendered, but the hardliners retreated to Denon to make their last stand. That's in a different sector though, so we'll get to that later. The Corellian sector was originally the Corellian hegemony, one of several interplanetary powers that came together to form the Republic. Most of these powers were colonies of Coruscant created in a millennia-long period of colonization using generation ships that traveled at the speed of light, but no faster. This meant it took centuries or even millennia to reach even the tight cluster of planets around the core that make up the heart of what would eventually be the Republic. The colony ships were entire self-sustaining cities capable of carrying tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of people through space indefinitely. Corellia was a relatively late settlement of this era, on the far edge of what Coruscant could reach even with several thousand years of colonization efforts. Even before Corellia got their hands on hyperdrive, they had a multiplanetary empire due to the good fortune of having a total of 5 habitable worlds in the Corellia system. The Drawl and the Solonians are both furry burrowing sentients native to 2 different planets of the Corellian system. I have to imagine they're related somehow, although I'm not sure how. The Solonians are especially proactive tunnelers. Their homeworld is covered in a tunnel network, and they covered Corellia in one too, where they are known as the Solonian Tunnels. Talus and Tralus are a pair of planets in the Corellia system who orbit around one another even as they orbit the Sun, which is why they're called the Twin Worlds or the Double Worlds. They share a planetary government called the Federation of the Double Worlds, or FedDub for short, and these guys do not get along with the rest of the Corellian system. I'm not totally sure why, but all 3 of the other planets have teamed up to try and bring them into line of the past, and it didn't work. Officially, FedDub is a democratic republic, but word is that the corporations run things. They deal with a ton of terrorists and pirates during the Imperial era, mainly because their government is super dysfunctional, and without the Republic or the Empire to babysit them, things start spinning out almost immediately. But wait, we're not done yet. In addition to the species with homeworlds in the Corellian system, the Koragut are native to the planet of Altawar, not too far away from the Corellian system. No word on their anatomy, but the Corellians found them in the Proto-Republic era and reduced them to a client state, inhibiting their access to technology in order to ensure an ongoing ability to dominate them. Something which has apparently worked for the entire multi-millennia spanning history of the Republic? I'm suspicious. Corellia might have a shady reputation with Altawar, but they can't have kept galactic standard technology from them for thousands of years. Sooner or later, the cracks would open up. While Altawar is very close to Corellia, the Frosians' homeworld, planet Froz, is in the outlier systems of the Corellian sector. The Frosians were also reduced to a client state by the Corellians, which they didn't particularly appreciate. They didn't go SEP in the Clone Wars, presumably because it would have been suicide when Corellia was loyalist, but they supported the rebellion in the Galactic Civil War. When the Empire caught wind of it, they orbitally bombarded the planet. Supposedly, this convinced the Koragut over in Altawar to keep quiet about their own problems with humanocentric government in the Corellian sector. Okay, we're almost done. The Nosarians are yet another species native to the Corellian sector, this time to planet New Plimto on the outskirts of the sector, although reports vary on which outskirt. This map puts them on the border with Duro's sector, but other reports say they're on the border of the Deep Core, which is nowhere near Duro. The Corellians discovered the Nosarians in the early Republic era when they were filling in all the unexplored territory in their sector and reduced them to a client state like the Koragut and the Frosians. The Nosarians appealed to the Republic multiple times, especially in the High and Late Republic eras when it had become extremely powerful, but Corellia is a powerful planet and New Plimto is not, so their appeals were rejected and environmental regulations were used to basically outlaw the Nosarians' entire economy. Obviously, the Corellians don't say that they want to keep their giant sector because it's full of aliens who they've treated horribly, and who therefore absolutely would not be part of a voting bloc with them in the Senate, but come on, that's definitely the reason why the Corellians didn't release all these colony worlds to get more votes in the Senate, the way they did Lorinar and Byblos. Okay, one more. The Govians are allegedly the native species of planet Govia, but this is a species with no distinct anatomy or history who share their name with their alleged home planet, so as usual, I suspect this is a planetary demonym mistaken for a species name. Surely, if the Govians were an alien species, there would be at least one story of the Corellians mugging them. Sakoria is a planet ruled by the Sakorian Triad, a secret council of one human, one Droll, and one Solonian, so it seems like if you're from the Corellia system, you get to have self-determination. It's only extrasolar aliens who get the whip. Sakoria has a moon called Sarcophagus, which is used as a giant graveyard. It's got a population of less than 1 billion, so it's not super important, but that moon is super cool and I wanted to bring it up. Similarly, Themis has a population of only about 10,000, puny. Hundreds of planets like that in most sectors, thousands in the Corellian sector. But it's also a source of a type of kyber crystal called Rubat crystals. They're pretty rare, so Themis never got strip-mined like Jeddah, let alone gutted the way Ilum was, but Jedi would go there to seek out a crystal for lightsabers, using the Force to find them, despite how scarce they are. Nubia has a population of about 1 billion, so it's a major world, barely, and is mainly famous for being home to Nubian star drives, who custom-build really nice starships. Tradeco and Farm Corp are also headquartered there, along with Industrial Automaton, who make the R-Series astromechs. Nubia's massive underground aquifers are used to feed massive farms, mostly owned by Farm Corp, which is used to feed most of the rest of the sector, especially Dorsus, a planet with tens of billions of people and a significant percentage of its surface covered in city. It's not an ecumenopolis, but it's getting close. Nubia is also the headquarters of Green Mantle Command. I don't know why Nubia and not Dinon or Humberine, those two aren't in Corellian sector, but they're in Green Mantle. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Dulur sector in the 2nd Green Mantle Command of the colonies in the southern core. Dulur sector has 2 important planets on it, one you might have heard of and one you definitely haven't. The one you've never heard of is Kalata. It's a major repulsor construction hub, making parts for repulsor lifts, repulsor tanks, land speeders, the takeoff repulsors for starships, everything that hovers basically. They also make speeder bikes, which makes sense since that's basically just a seat and some controls strapped to a repulsor. Kalata is the kind of planet where it's probably wealthier and more influential than any planet you've ever set foot on, and yet you've never heard of it because there's so many other core worlds like it. The planet you might have heard of is Deveron, homeworld of the Deveronians. For some reason, Deveronian histories always start out by talking about their matriarchal aristocratic tradition, even though, 1, that's not super relevant anymore. The aristocracy are still rich and hold a prominent place in society, but Deveron has been a democracy for millennia, so this is trivia. And 2, it's not particularly unique. Most aristocracies aren't explicitly matriarchal or patriarchal, but name a planetary royal who is neither a woman nor famous primarily for being related to a woman. If you thought of Prince Lee Char of the Mon Calamari, then congratulations on your knowledge of moderately obscure Clone Wars political figures. But Prince Bail Organa was Viceroy of Alderaan and chaired the High Council. Politically, he was more powerful than his wife, but she was Queen Breha Organa. He was just Prince Consort. Naboo's queen is an elected position, not a real monarch, but the position is steeped in aristocratic tradition, and as part of that tradition, it is a role traditionally held by a woman. Rana Mestrahalt is the legendary Duro's queen who ruled Duro when they developed the hyperdrive and brought the planet into the Republic. She was succeeded by her son, but he doesn't get statues, Queen Rana does. Mandalore's aristocratic tradition wasn't exclusive to women in the late Republic, but Satine Kryze ruled as Duchess. Her husband, Duke Adonai, was, strictly speaking, Duke Consort. Dathomir, Queen. Geonosis, Queen. Hapes, Queen. It's not like patriarchal aristocratic traditions never happen. Onderon has a king, Mon Cala has a king, but matriarchal aristocratic traditions are not at all some special Deveronian thing. They're super common. Anyway, Deveron was not far from the front lines of the trailing theater of the Clone Wars and got hit by deep raids on a couple of occasions. This was part of the galaxy where Sullust mostly fought Iriadu, but Separatist territory stretched all the way to Thifera and would occasionally try to punch through to Deveron. Savage Opress raided the Jedi Temple on the planet and absolutely wrecked the Jedi there. The Empire didn't like non-humans and it hated the Jedi, and being home to a Jedi Temple meant that Deveron was pretty high up the shit list. Palpatine installed a human governor for the Deveronians, although Deveron could still elect their own senator, up until the Senate was abolished. A lot of Deveronians joined the Rebel Alliance in that period immediately after the destruction of the Death Star, when the Empire had gone completely mask off on the assumption that they were invincible, and then a week later their superweapon got blown up. There's no record of a full-scale revolt on Deveron, though. Looks like it joined the New Republic with the rest of Green Mantle after the government was formally declared on Coruscant. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Duro Sector and 2nd Green Mantle Command of the Southern Core. Duro Sector is one of the rare sectors whose name actually makes fucking sense. The capital is planet Duro, home of the Duro species, and most of the planets here are Duro's colonies, although Duro is the only major world left. Duro was a slave world of the Rakatan Infinite Empire, forced to help build the Starforge against their will. When a plague killed most of the genetically identical Rakata, the Duros finished off the survivors in and around their planet, reverse-engineered Rakatan hyperdrives, and adapted them to work without relying on the dark side of the Force as a power source. All Rakatan technology used the dark side as a power source because they had engineered themselves to be 100% Force-sensitive, and their Force tradition was totally immersed in the dark side, and making their technology reliant on the dark side meant that slave species couldn't learn to use it, except in the rare cases when they were Force-sensitive naturally. That genetic engineering made them vulnerable to the plague that killed them all. Some Rakatans were able to quarantine themselves, but precisely 0 of them were immune, because their genetics were basically identical. They were basically a whole civilization of inbred cousins, and their reliance on the dark side also introduced weaknesses into their technology. Rakatans could only travel to planets that were aligned with the dark side. Bis, Tatooine, Kashyyyk, Korriban, Manan, and Duro were all on the menu, but Coruscant, Tython, Ossus, Alderaan, Corellia, and Ryloth were not. When the Duros adapted the technology to work on mundane reactor fuel, they also removed the tech's biggest weakness. Without a reliance on the dark side, a hyperdrive could go anywhere. Strictly speaking, you don't even need a gravity well, as long as you've got extremely precise coordinates and a nav computer accurate to within a few hundred kilometers max, which, on the one hand, pretty much no one has those things, they're really hard, but on the other hand, it's at least theoretically possible in a way that it very much is not for Rakatan hyperdrives. The reliance on the dark side held the Rakatans back from ever truly ruling the galaxy, despite having economic and military power that eclipsed any nation during or after their time. They could conquer any species they could reach, but they could only reach a tiny handful of species. Once the Duros had hyperdrive tech, they made contact with a lot of nearby human worlds, which had been colonizing the galaxy with lightspeed generation ships for millennia. These ships accelerated to the speed of light and then made a centuries-long journey to relatively nearby star systems like Corellia, Anaxes, and Alderaan. Each ship was a full-size city of hundreds of thousands of inhabitants, living in a self-contained biosphere that would simply become the planetary capital when they landed at their destination and opened up the airlocks. Once the Duros and their hyperdrive made contact with humans, they could get back in touch with the homeworld and other generation ship colonies in a matter of weeks. Hyperdrives really sucked back then, so it did take weeks, and cultures that had been out of contact with one another for millennia were suddenly thrust into a galactic community with one another, one built on the smoldering ruins of the Rakatans without even really realizing it. People knew from the Duros that the Rakatans existed, but did not understand the limitations of the dark-side-powered tech. The Duros had worked out alternative power sources because they're a normal species who have, at any given time, 1 or 2 Force users amongst their entire population tops. They didn't realize the drawbacks of the dark-side power source. They thought Rakatan hyperdrives could go anywhere just like Duros hyperdrives, and just required a special power source that the Duros couldn't use. So the Rakatans were thought of as a regional power of similar scale to the Duro kingdom that had replaced it, and that most stories of their accomplishments were probably propaganda and myth, because if the Rakatans had never even reached nearby Corellia, then how powerful could they really be? It wasn't until pretty deep into the Old Republic era that archaeologists started reassessing the power of the Infinite Empire. The Duros followed the same trajectory as a lot of early Galactic Republic members, where initially the Republic was a pretty hands-off government. The power of the Senate over member planets was really small, so major planets wanted to be the capital of big sectors that were powerful unto themselves. The Republic called itself a single nation, but it was really more of a military alliance with an economic treaty. The sectors were deeply tied to one another politically and economically, but there were few enough of them back then that the agreements and treaties signed between sectors themselves, without going through the Senate to rope the whole Republic in, could be as or more important than Republic legislation. So the Duro Kingdom, as it was known back then, made itself really big with direct control over major colony worlds like Aquilae and Adapap. But by the middle of the early Republic era, the Republic had millions of sectors. The Duro Kingdom, Herglic Trade Empire, and Corellia could still get together and hash out an economic treaty between themselves, but the importance of even these major regional powers of the Southern Core were completely eclipsed by the galaxy-spanning influence of the Republic. Gradually, being a powerful sector that could make your own deals without Senate approval became a worse strategy as compared to being an alliance of several smaller sectors that could bring more votes to the Galactic Senate. So the Duro Kingdom sliced itself to pieces by setting up major colonies as sector capitals or as freestanding planets with individual Senate representation. Now, you may be wondering, how could the Republic have millions of sectors when it now, today, has barely 1 million inhabited worlds total? Answer: once it became beneficial to have more votes in the Senate rather than bigger individual sectors, major worlds started slicing themselves up into multiple sectors on a single planet. After all, if your colony world with one town and a population of less than 1 million is going to get a Senate seat, then surely, say, Kuat with a population of 3.5 billion can have 3,500 Senate seats. I want to be totally clear here. I do not mean that Kuat had a total of 3,500 one-town colony planets out in the colonies in Inner Rim and declared each one individually to be an independent government with its own sector, although they did also do that. I mean that there were 3,500 sectors on one planet! The Alsacan conflicts are a story for another time, but the way this gerrymandering totally paralyzed the Senate is one of the reasons behind them. The Republic was so completely non-functional as a governing body that Alsacan basically declared it defunct and started ignoring Senate legislation, daring them to actually pass a law reaffirming that it was illegal to blow up Duros freighters for entering Alsacan colonial space. The Senate couldn't do it. Coruscant's planetary government unilaterally, illegally commanded the Republic Navy to respond, and the Navy did it because the Senate had become a joke, so no one cared if the Navy was technically breaking Senate law. By the end of the first 5 Alsacan conflicts, the big ones, there were some reasonably sane standards applied to what could or could not be declared a sector. By then, the Duro Kingdom was basically just one planet, and also had changed its name to the Duro Sector as monarchies started to fall out of favor across the Republic, in no small part because Alsacan was aristocratic and had started the Alsacan conflicts by blowing up Duros freighters. Alsacan was also pretty humanocentric, so a lot of alien species turned their backs on monarchies in this era. By the time of the Old Republic era, planet Duro had been poisoned to the point of being basically completely inhospitable. You can still breathe down there, and a few people even live down there, but the vast majority of the planet lives in giant orbital megacities. There's 20 orbital cities containing over 90% of the planet's population, so the average population of each megacity is somewhere in the hundreds of millions. They're massive. Being aliens means that the Duros did not have a good time under the Pius Dea or the Empire, and in fact the Empire combined them with the Corellian sector to minimize their influence in the Senate. This was part of the reorganization of the Republic into the Empire before the Clone Wars were even completely over, so the Empire was still pretending to be a continuation of the Republic's tradition of sentient rights and individual liberty, which is why the Duros could still vote for a senator and were even pretty well represented by Garm Bel Iblis of Corellia. Corellians were friends with the Duros, despite the way they treated all the other aliens in their sector, so they weren't handed over to a cruel overlord the way some of the less popular alien species were, the ones that the Empire could grind under their heel without anyone in the core worlds getting angry enough to firebomb a police station over it. Although, the Empire was probably hoping the Corellians would do some heel grinding to the Duros, considering the way they treated most of the other alien species in the Corellian sector. But there were huge protests on Corellia the day of the reorganization. The Corellians hated the Empire. At this early stage, the Emperor wasn't removing the Duros from public life completely, but he was combining 2 troublesome sectors into one troublesome sector with only 1 vote in the Senate. Rebels tried to liberate Duro in the immediate aftermath of Yavin, when Outer Rim worlds were rising up in open rebellion against the Empire. Duro and Corellia were powerful worlds, deeply sympathetic to the rebellion, and pretty damn close to Coruscant. But this also made them a high priority for the Empire to keep control of, and the attempted uprising was quickly crushed. Duro would even go on to be a holdout planet of Green Mantle after they mostly surrendered to the New Republic after the Battle of Jakku. There were a lot of Imperial holdouts in the core and Inner Rim right after the New Republic was declared on Coruscant, and the New Republic split up their fleet to send ships in all directions to bring these planets into the New Republic. But the ships weren't all that necessary on Duro, which was surrounded by friendly planets and had a deeply anti-Imperial population. The holdout garrison there did not last long. You will not be surprised to learn that the reorganization of Corellia and Duro into one sector was reversed, and Duro once again has independent representation in the Galactic Senate of the New Republic. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about Emo Sector in the 2nd Green Mantle Command of the Southern Core. The capital of this sector is a planet called Dantil, which can help you locate it on a map in case you ever need to pinpoint the location of a boring sector where nothing happened. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Humbarine Sector and 2nd Green Mantle Command of the Arrowhead. The Arrowhead is the core of the core. Humbarine was settled by Kuati generation ships, and Kuat was settled by Coruscanti generation ships, and Humbarine went on to colonize Balmorra and Commenor with generation ships. Humbarine has a connection that traces itself all the way back to Coruscant, but there's also a really clear breakpoint where they split off and developed in isolation for millennia. Like most human colonies, Humbarine stuck with the Mother World during the various splits in the galaxy. I talk a lot about the power of Kuat manufacturing and fighting against the Tion hegemony and the signatories of Waymancy, but while Kuat was the biggest industrial planet, their descendant worlds like Humbarine and Balmorra are part of that core world's industrial might. Humbarine was a loyalist planet in the Clone Wars, despite a few dozen minor planets in their sector joining the Separatists. Despite its industrial capacity, Green Mantle neglected Humbarine to focus on Cato Neimoidia, generally leaving the defense of the industrial core to White Cuirass, which is great for Kuat and Balmorra, but Humbarine isn't in White Cuirass command, it's in Green Mantle. And with friendly planets in the sector, General Grievous and a Separatist fleet could fly in, send shuttles down to gather up fuel to top off, and then make a short hop to Humbarine with a full tank of gas to spend on turbo lasers and shields for the fight. So even though Humbarine was technically way behind Republic lines, Green Mantle's negligence in cleaning up those minor worlds in the Humbarine sector meant Grievous could sneak in a fleet to attack the planet. Grievous stood no chance of holding the planet, so he just leveled it. The planet wasn't rendered completely uninhabitable, you can still breathe the air and some arable land remains, but Humbarine went from Ecumenopolis with over 100 billion inhabitants to ruinous wasteland with less than 1 billion inhabitants. Half a century later, it still hasn't fully recovered and is no longer a major manufacturing world. That saved them from the shame of being any kind of major contributor to the Galactic Empire, though. They were an Imperial fortress world, but the local garrison surrendered to the New Republic after Jakku, along with most of the rest of Green Mantle. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at the Iceno sector and the 2nd Green Mantle Command of the Slice of the Inner Rim. Planet Iceno is technically the sector capital, but nothing ever happens there, and it's not super important outside of that one capital building. The important planet in the Iceno sector is Denon, one of the few Ecumenopoli found outside the core worlds, and according to some reports, the planet with the second largest population after Coruscant. It's a distant second, reportedly about 500 billion, and that's how these things go. A lot of people want to live on the biggest planet in the galaxy, and a lot of people want to live far away from the noise and bustle of a city planet, but people don't generally want to live on the second biggest planet in the galaxy. Like, yeah, Coruscant's expensive, not everyone who wants to live there can afford to, but it's a pretty narrow slice of the population who don't have enough money for Coruscant, but do have enough for Denon. After Endor, the rebels demolished Darksaber, Nighthammer, and Emerald Banner, while rebellions all throughout the galaxy punched holes in basically every single one of the Oversector commands, with only a few exceptions like Shadow Hand to the Deep Core. People knew about the secret passage to the far side of the core that General Grievous took to reach Coruscant, and Black Sword Command was fortified to guard that flank, but everyone expected the next blow to fall on Green Mantle, home of rebel-friendly planets like Corellia, Duro, and Cato Neimoidia. Denon was one of the only loyalist worlds in all of Green Mantle, and certainly the biggest and most powerful. Unfortunately, with 500 billion people, it held over half of the entire Oversector's population. There's a reason why the rebels swung the other way, towards Coruscant by way of Cal Ceti and Frisia. The Empire sent out Black Sword and Azure Hammer to meet the rebels at Jakku, and we all know how that battle turned out. Denon didn't surrender afterwards. They had been preparing to be the rock against which the rebel fleet would break for nearly a year. But Nubia, Duro, and Corellia all flipped to the New Republic as soon as it was declared on Coruscant, which meant most of the shipyards used by Green Mantle were now loyal to the Republic. The New Republic split their fleet in a couple of different directions during this post-Jakku mop-up period. They didn't want to echo the reconquest of the Rim at the end of the Clone Wars when the freshly declared Galactic Empire finished off Separatist remnants, but there were a few planets that it was decided couldn't be allowed to go Imperial and had to be cleaned up even after the war was officially declared over. Bilbringi to secure the Spinwards flank of the core, the Meridian sector to keep a clear line open from the core to liberated planets like Mon Cala and Kashyyyk, and Denon, to deny its vast population to any attempt by the Imperials to attack the southern core. With total orbital superiority achieved quickly and easily, the New Republic spent over a year methodically unwinding the defenses of Dinon, despite the war allegedly having ended. Because of their orbital superiority, they didn't have to fight block by block for the entire planet. Instead, they just had to secure a landing zone big enough to unload entire battalions, push from there to key strategic areas like the planetary capital building or a major Imperial fortress, and capture the target. Fighting took forever and was pretty fierce for the troops involved, but it didn't involve that many troops, as the New Republic was demilitarizing on one side, and on the other, the Empire had plenty of warm bodies on Dinon, but in the face of the New Republic orbital supremacy, big targets like AT-ATs and saber tanks were unusable. Y-Wings would just take them out. The Empire had tons of Imperial Army troopers with regular old blasters, but pretty soon they had no heavy armor, no artillery, no TIE fighters, and definitely no Star Destroyers. By the end, the New Republic would sometimes get a daily loss ratio of 100 to 1. By that time, the high-ranking Imperial commanders who'd made the decision to resist despite the mass surrender of Imperial forces across the rest of Green Mantle had all been captured or killed by the New Republic, and the mid-ranking guys left over didn't love the idea of spending the next 10 years being slowly ground down to a nub in the hopes that the New Republic would give up and go away. Especially since the New Republic could always give up and orbitally bombard the planet instead. That would be a violation of the New Republic's principles, but when someone gives up, you can't predict exactly what they'll give up on, and the Imperial Remnant chose to surrender and join the Inner Systems Imperial Remnant rather than roll those dice. Ecumenopoli being what they are, large sections of Dinon were already part of the Inner Systems Imperial Remnant. But when that all fell apart just a few years in, Dinon, like most of the former Inner Systems, joined the New Republic. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at the Morro Bay sector and the 2nd Green Mantle Command of the Slice and the Colonies. The only notable planet in Morro Bay sector is Talasea. This forest planet used to be a major world but has been almost completely depopulated by the passage of time. Story goes that the last town on Talasea harbored a fugitive Jedi early in the Imperial era and got wiped out by Darth Vader and the 501st Legion. Definitely, by the time Rogue Squadron set up shop here between Endor and Jakku, the Palace of the Governor was ruined, but recently enough that it was still usable as a secret base. The secret base became big and official after Jakku, when Green Mantle surrendered to the New Republic. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about Parmarak sector and 2nd Green Mantle Command of the Southern Corps. Karvos II is the homeworld of the Matukai, a force tradition created in the Old Republic era when a woman from Karvos got so good at karate that she became a wizard. The Jedi Order decided the Matukai weren't a dark side cult and let them do their thing, but the Empire targeted them along with a bunch of other force traditions as sufficiently Jedi-esque to be worth exterminating. Since the Matukai weren't targeted by Order 66 the way the Jedi were, they had much more warning and a lot more of them survived, including on Jedha, where they were part of the Convocation of the Force. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at the Quanta sector in the 2nd Green Mantle Command of the Southern Corps. The only notable planet of Quanta sector is Tinel 4, which is only notable for a civil war in the Old Republic era when they used WMDs on their capital and turned it into a crater called the Abyss. It was also part of the Inner Systems Imperial Remnant, a collection of pro-Imperial core worlds who were allowed to remain under the governing traditions established by the Empire as an ally of the New Republic on Coruscant in exchange for some concessions to things like the Star Destroyer fleet. That sounds really notable, but it fell apart pretty much instantly, and Tinel 4 ultimately joined the New Republic. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about the Quelor sector in 2nd Green Mantle Command of the Slice and the Colonies. Planet Quelor might technically be an ecumenopolis, depending on how you define it. Its population of tens of billions is much more than the planet can support on its own, which means if there's ever any kind of interruption in trade, it doesn't matter how hard the planet pivots to emergency agriculturalization, a bunch of people are going to die, period, which is something you usually associate with city planets. You know, when Naboo is blockaded, that's really bad for the economy and might cut people off from life-saving medicine, and also food supply might get really short for a year or two while they ramp up agriculture for total self-sufficiency, but ultimately they can become totally self-sufficient if they have to. Quelor cannot. On the other hand, less than a quarter of the land area of Quelor is covered in city. We don't really have a word for this spot between ordinary major world and proper ecumenopolis. Extra major world? Ecumenopolet? Not much actually happened on Quelor, though. They stayed loyal to the Republic in the Clone Wars, even though most of the rest of the sector went separatist, and they protested the Empire after the Battle of Yavin. The protests didn't get violent, but they did burn an effigy of Emperor Palpatine, which was enough to get the stormtroopers blasting. Quelor was one of many planets in the Green Mantle that surrendered to the New Republic after Jakku, leaving Dinon over an Iceno sector to fend for itself. Quelor sector is really Neimoidian space, though. Like many sectors, it's named after a planet that is not its capital, although the capital was moved there in the Imperial era, and it is at least a very major world. The sector is home to thousands of Neimoidian colonies, and while most of them are tiny one-town planets, there are not one, nor two, but three major worlds amongst the colonies: Deco Neimoidia, Koru Neimoidia, and, most famously, Cato Neimoidia. In addition to Neimoidia itself, Neimoidia is an exclave of the Quelor sector, which is located pretty far away in White Kira's command, but by the late Republic era, Cato Neimoidia had become the most prominent Neimoidian planet anyway. The Neimoidians are a Duros evolutionary offshoot who evolved really fucking fast, to the point where mutation is probably a more accurate term. Not overnight, but evolution usually occurs over the course of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, not just 5 or 10,000. Neimoidia really does suck, though, a desert planet that somehow has tons of fog, and which is technically arable, but whose only staple crop is fungus. This kind of rapid evolution can only happen when anyone who doesn't have the right adaptations flat out dies, and maybe Neimoidia was actually that bad. The Neimoidians ran the Trade Federation, a shipping corporation that had been shady since at least the Gank massacres of the Old Republic era, and by the Late Republic they'd become a cartel. Private captains with YT freighters could always pick something up from one planet to schlep it to another, but the Trade Federation held a monopoly on bulk freighters. These kinds of colossal mega freighters cost a lot of money up front, and anytime someone paid to have something on this scale built, the Trade Federation would cut their profits down negative, basically paying their customers to use their services instead of the new rivals, until that rival folded, at which point the Trade Federation could jack their prices back up to make up the loss. Since they operated in the Outer Rim a lot, which was full of pirates, the Trade Feds steadily increased the armament on their ships and employed larger and larger droid security forces produced by the Techno Union to defend it all. We all know where this is going. When the Republic tried to scale back the extent to which megacorporations like the Trade Federation were allowed to freely exploit the Outer Rim, the Trade Feds blockaded Naboo and later backed the Confederacy of Independent Systems. This made Quelor sector a part of separatist space, despite Quelor itself remaining loyal to the Republic and the Trade Federation maintaining a fig leaf of neutrality. They held up pretty well considering they were deep in Republic space, far beyond any help. The Neimoidians were fighting defense from the moment the war began, and they knew the Separatists would never be able to conquer this deep into the core. Grievous launched a pretty impressive raid into Green Mantle planets like Duro and Humberine, but he never even tried to occupy them, just wrecked them and retreated. That helped relieve some pressure on Cato Neimoidia, but their only real hope is that the CIS would win victories on other fronts, and that would wear down the Republic and convince them to negotiate peace and hand the captured Neimoidian worlds back over to the CIS as part of the treaty. Unfortunately for them, the CIS plan to link their trailing and spinward segments through Hutt space failed when the Hutt sided with the Republic. Their backup plan to punch through the mid-rim to link up stalled out at Kashyyyk, and the Neimoidians ultimately had to surrender to the freshly minted Empire. The Neimoidians are lucky they didn't get outright genocided by the Imperials. The Corps wouldn't have liked it, but man, after the Clone Wars, they might have looked the other way. Palpatine was still pretty careful back then, though, and didn't want to overplay his hand. The Neimoidians kept their heads down through the Galactic Civil War. The rebels didn't want to be associated with the Separatists since they were hoping to get the support of Republic loyalist planets like Corellia, Chandrila, and Naboo, so they never put much effort into recruiting Neimoidians, and the impoverished Neimoidians were not in much position to seek out allies, nor were they in much of a mood to tempt the Empire into genociding a second Separatist-affiliated species like they had the Geonosians. Cato Neimoidia was one of the planets that joined the New Republic pretty much immediately after it was declared on Coruscant, but they came in the tail end of that wave after it was clear that the Imperials were in no position to fight for the Southern Core or the Inner Slice. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're talking about Ratchuk Sector and 2nd Green Mantle Command of the Colonies in the Slice. This little sector squeezed in between Commodore Quelor Sector and the Morobe Sector is mostly only famous for Hensara, and famous is a pretty huge stretch there. Between Endor and Jakku, the rebels snuck some material into this corner of Green Mantle, hoping they could weaken the Imperials here enough for general uprisings on friendly planets of the nearby Southern Core, like Corellia, Duro, and nearby Quelor, to topple the whole oversector and push the front line of the war up to White Kyrus. The whole plan started to fall apart when a rebel ship called the Battle of Yavin got caught in Ratchuk Sector and went down on Hensara. They hid the ship in a lake while waiting for backup from Rogue Squadron, who arrived and tore up the Imperial search party, rescued the crew of the downed ship, and skedaddled. This was generally how the Green Mantle operation went. The rebels would try to operate behind enemy lines the way they had done in the Outer and Mid-Rims. They discover this doesn't work nearly as well in the colonies, and they're able to limit their losses but not really make a lot of headway against Green Mantle's power. Eventually, the whole plan was abandoned in favor of the strike through the far side of the core towards Chalceddy, which the Imperials attempted to intercept at Jakku, and when that failed and took Black Sword and Azure Hammer with it, Green Mantle just gave up and Ratchuk Sector came with them. Greetings, my name is Camille, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at 2nd Green Mantle's miscellaneous core worlds. This is the core, so a lot of these planets have independent Senate representation, but it's the southern core, so some of them are just the victim of Emperor Palpatine's purge of the bureaucracy, leaving the holonet with patchy and imprecise information. When you think of the core worlds, you're mostly thinking of the Arrowhead, the region of space with all the wealthiest, most powerful planets. The southern core isn't getting colonized by the Hutts or anything, but it's definitely not Coruscant either. For example, planet Mawan, homeworld of the Mawan species so pale you can see their veins clearly through their skin, was ruled by a strict caste system with utility workers on the bottom. One day in the late Republic era, they realized that everyone's water supply was under their exclusive control, and they didn't really have to take shit from anybody. The resulting civil war ruined the capital city of Natan and led to a decade of rule by rival crime lords fighting over what was left of the planet. The Jedi finally intervened to restore peace to the planet after they started using chemical weapons. Balosars are humans with little antennae. They're a different species, but also they are exactly like humans except for those little antennae. They're from the planet Balosar, which has been completely ruined by megacorporations even before the Imperial era. The native Balo mushrooms are cultivated on an industrial scale by corporations like Biotech Industries and Faircrest Pharmaceuticals to make death sticks, and there's a huge death stick smuggling underworld on the planet, stealing death sticks from off the manufacturing line to sell for less than the cost of production. Megacorps encourage the Balosar underworld to target their rivals, so the whole planet is constantly consumed in low-grade, corporate-backed gang warfare. The entire surface has been devastated by millennia of totally unregulated, unrestrained industrial production. The planet's buildings are said to reach so high that light doesn't reach the surface, and yet the total population is under 10 billion, a total population implosion from the planet's peak. The Balo mushrooms are grown underground in deep caverns, the only part of the planet that hasn't been completely poisoned. Ricopia is a desert world and allegedly home to a hidden fortress of the Sayugi Dervishes, an order of Force-sensitive assassins hunted seemingly to extinction by the Jedi during the High Republic era. The Sayugi culture in general definitely still exists on the poisoned world of Ricopia, where they float on sulfuric seas on hover barges and have a reputation for banditry and general skullduggery. By the late Republic era, the Jedi seemed pretty satisfied that the Dervishes were all gone, despite the Sayugi nomads continuing to make a nuisance of themselves on Ricopia, and the Dervishes haven't emerged from hiding in the Imperial or New Republic eras. But hey, they are assassins, so maybe they're just too sneaky for anyone to notice them coming to and from their hidden fortress on their assassination missions. Woo! Perma is another criminal world in the Southern Core, home to the Perma crime families, although there's no details beyond that. Just one more planet ruining the core world's pristine reputation for white-collar embezzlement and graft by getting involved in dirty blue-collar street crime. The Jacapri of planet Jacapris have no physical description and are named after their homeworld. They do have a distinct polytheistic culture with many legends concerning the birth and death of the galaxy, so they aren't totally undocumented, but I still suspect they are a planetary demonym mistaken for a species name. Humans or Duros or whatever can develop a polytheistic culture, you don't need an extra set of arms for that. Gamma Sen are a species with 2 thumbs and flat facial features from the planet Gamma. Supposedly they pledge their loyalty to Emperor Palpatine's clone. That's really the only thing on record about them. Not a great thing to be remembered for. I have a policy of including all species homeworlds because I don't want to imply that a species is too unimportant to be worth including, but given the one fact on record about them, maybe the Gamma Sen would have preferred if I left them out. Colomus is supposedly home to the Colomai, short humanoids with enormous heads, especially proportionate to their small bodies. These guys' physical bodies allegedly withered away because of their focus on mental acuity. That's not how evolution works. Having such a puny birth canal would only make birthing a larger cranium more dangerous for both mother and child, which means the mother is less likely to live to produce more children, and the child is less likely to survive long enough to produce children of their own. Fewer children means evolutionary pressures against the trait, not for it. Anyway, however these guys actually evolved, Columnus was the site of a relatively major battle in the First Great Schism of the Jedi Order, very early on in the Republic's history, before the Tianese War, when it was entirely contained in the core worlds and colonies. Back then, the Republic was in contact with the Jedi homeworld of Ossus near the Tion cluster, but the Jedi weren't part of the Republic, so this war within the Order was fought between a couple of thousand of wizard monks, not massive armies. The battle on Columnus was fought between less than 100 total combatants, and to the Republic, it was just an incident of political violence as part of an internal conflict in a foreign nation that they were moderately friendly with. It was concerning that the fight happened in Republic space, but it was in an uninhabited ravine, so nothing ever really came of it. Planet Letau is the homeworld and namesake of the Legions of Letau, the Jedi breakaway organization that fought the Jedi Order in the First Great Schism. Letau was firmly in Republic space, but it was not yet colonized by any Republic members. The Legions of Letau were emphatically pro-Republic, hoping to ally with the Republic against the Jedi. The Republic didn't bite, though. They weren't formal allies of the Jedi or anything, but they were perfectly friendly with them and didn't want to be involved in this war. The skirmish on Columnus was the first time the tension between the Legion and the Jedi flared up into violence, and the Legions lost. The Jedi followed up with a full-scale assault on Letau, which succeeded, and although some of the Letau leadership escaped, the Jedi hunted them down pretty quick. The Republic did not like that the Jedi had staged a full-scale planetary invasion in Republic space, but although Letau was well within the boundaries of the Republic, it was not a part of any Republic sector, and it had a population of less than 100,000, so they let it slide. Planet Balassa was sympathetic to the Jedi after Order 66, and while they maintained nominal semi-sovereignty as an Imperial member world with Senate representation ruled by their own planetary Senate, in practice Emperor Palpatine gave the planet over to Inquisitor Malorum to hunt down any Jedi who may have come to Balassa looking for shelter. Rendili is more the sort of world you'd think of as being a core world. It's the headquarters for Rendili Star Drive, Rendili Hyperworks, Rendili/Ventravalis Drive Yards, and Rendili Vehicle Corporation. I don't know if it's a law that all corporations headquartered on the planet have to have Rendili in their name, but it would explain a lot. Rendili's population is allegedly 600 billion, but it also looks like this from orbit. A population of 600 billion should cover the entire land surface of the planet and city, although not necessarily the oceans, and that clearly hasn't happened. My guess, someone added an extra zero by mistake. Although 60 billion is enough that I'd expect to be able to see multiple megacities from space. Maybe if there's one giant megacity on the other side of the planet that covers up like a third of the surface, leaving the planet largely non-urban on this side? Or maybe they accidentally added 2 zeros and Rendili has a pretty standard population of 6 billion. There's a bunch of other core worldy planets in Green Mantle. Samaria is a desert planet that mostly manufactures droids. Radani Prime is the headquarters of Rithani Products, which makes machine parts for walkers, including the AT-AT and the AT-ST, which made them pretty loyal to the Empire. Cedratus is home to the galaxy's premier league of gladiator walker combat, and Trellin is possibly the most nondescript major world in the galaxy, and yet somehow got a moderately significant trade route named after them. I say Trellin is the most nondescript, but it's probably tied with Lansono. Lansono is represented in the Galactic Senate, so it's gotta be a reasonably significant planet, but I'll be damned if I can find a single fact about it. The only record remaining is that Senator Candabrine Boo supported the Military Creation Act at the start of the Clone Wars. Greetings, my name is Cameron, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Varvena Sector and the 2nd Green Mantle Command at the Southern Core. Varvena Sector is a sector that exists.